Hello everyone, Adek here. In this video, I will do an in-depth analysis of Enkidu Lancer from Fate Grand Order. We will look at how he performs in solos, how he stacks up against his main competitors, and his overall value for any FGO account where he is summoned. There will be timestamps for this video, so feel free to jump to any part of the video that really interests you. This channel is not monetized, and this video will only be made because I want to make the ultimate Enkidu analysis on YouTube, as someone with over 500 hours of playtime with him. If you watch the entirety of this video, you will have a very well-rounded understanding of Enkidu from a mechanical standpoint. This is my first and potentially my last voiceover video, so don't subscribe if you expect more analysis of this kind like true FGO YouTubers such as Onakokri do. I will also put links in the description for every video that I will show here, as well as some amazing content creators that I feel like deserve a big applause for making awesome FGO content and are not that well known. This analysis will take into account the latest buff from Enkidu's third skill, as well as the gameplay mechanics of the JP version of Fate Grand Order as of January 2024. For those who don't know me, I play FGO solely to have my daily dose of clay, and yeah, it's pretty much the best thing in the game. You can't really change my mind about that. My channel has been active for a while now, and my main kind of content is Enkidu solos. As of January 2024, my Enkidu is fully maxed out with both append skills and normal skills, as well as level 120 and full pause. If Enkidu can solo something, it's very likely that I have a video on it. That is, of course, if my channel already existed at the time of the event, and if I actually managed to finish. Latest case being the case files event from Reynes. I actually am pretty sure that Enkidu can solo both challenge quests, but I could not make it. For this analysis, I am going to expect a couple of things from you as the viewers. First of all, you already know the fundamentals of FGO. This analysis is not for those who are new to FGO and don't fully understand the gameplay mechanics. You are of course free to watch the video nonetheless, but be warned that there might be some things you won't fully understand. For my final thoughts on Enkidu, go to this point. Second, soloing in FGO is not a unified concept. The community of FGO is divided on what qualifies as an actual solo, as some allow themselves only taunters with an MP charge, while others use non-leveled servants like Cursed Armasan, William Tell, Luvia and so on to push the soloer a bit at the start of the battle. I prefer to limit myself to St. George Bond CE for most cases, while some special challenge quests require other specific use cases. This is mostly the case for weird boss gimmicks and mandatory story supports. Also, the so-called save scum is another big topic where the community diverges in different directions. Personally, I don't mind it, but I can see why other players would think of it as something negative. Third, feel free to disagree with me on some of the points that I'm going to present, as FGO can be very complex when analyzed deeply. But I would argue that my knowledge of Enkidu from a mechanical standpoint is very difficult to reach, even for experienced FGO players, as they aren't dedicated to this one servant as I am. Fourth and last point, the most important thing is that you have fun in FGO with your favorite servants. Don't let anything that I'm going to say in this video change the reality that FGO is not a difficult game, and you should feel attached to the servants that truly mean something to you. Please see this as an invite to be polite in the comment section for further discussion. With the premise out of the way, let's start with the actual analysis. Let's talk first of all about the deck of Enkidu. Enkidu is pretty famous for having a triple quick deck with a single target Buster Noble Phantasm. His quick cards don't have a very good MP gain, but they're great at generating stars with a hit count of 4. For the majority of the users, this deck is Enkidu's biggest weakness, as it makes him do less damage on burst turns, have little MP gain, and overall a mediocre synergy in team comps. Even though these points are valid if taken individually, in the context of Enkidu, only the last one is partially true. Enkidu doesn't have a high synergy with Buster supporters like Koyanskaya and Merlin, as his deck has only one Buster card and the boosting damage those servants offer isn't what Enkidu needs. However, this changed with his recent third skill buff, as now he is viable for the inflated 90++ quests that are showing up in the later JP events. The battery solves his poor MP gain in Buster teams and gives him a lot of freedom for selecting a Buster support servant. Furthermore, Enkidu doesn't have a very good synergy with Skadi and their summer version, because as I've already stated, His quick cards don't have a high MP gain, although it gets pretty good when you have 3 Skadis buffing him a lot. Paradoxically, the best support for Enkidu is actually Castoria. Enkidu has already enough damage to deal with most of FGO's bosses, his star generation is good with no buffs applied, and so the only thing that Enkidu really wants in a team are buffs to his arts card. Castoria and Enkidu has a very high synergy, and you can try that for yourself against Cernonos and other story bosses, or just watch my video about it. I bent Cernonos in half. I was pretty happy that it happened. Arguably, it doesn't get a lot better when it comes to single target lancers, because Enkidu has both the very high damage that it's needed for recent content, as well as the utility and the fact that he can profit from very different types of servants. In a solo context, which is Enkidu's comfort zone, the triple quick deck is one of Enkidu's biggest strengths, and one of the rare occasions where FGO shows its strength in a mechanically deep and multi-layered gameplay. This deck's flexibility comes from the fact that the player can adapt to multiple kinds of battles and bosses. If, for example, Enkidu needs to outburst a high-damaging boss fight, he can prepare himself to a boss turn by executing 3 quick attacks. Doing such will guarantee Enkidu to crit on the turn after, and so unleash a lot of damage on his own. For example, here you can see how I decided to go for a triple quick chain against MHXX, as she used their invincibility skill. The turn after that, Enkidu is going to use Enuma Elish and crit with his heart and buster card. And in most cases, this scenario means game over for the boss. This is a very common scenario where Enkidu's quick deck shows its strength, as most bosses in the game have a survivability skill which they are going to use as soon as their HPs are low. A guaranteed star bomb on demand is something that only very few servants in the game have, and all this comes on top of the fact that Enkidu still generates a decent amount of MP gain. Of course, the star bomb is not only good really for burst turns, but also for further boosting Enkidu's MP gain on successive turns, as sometimes you're very close to break an HP bar and you don't need the standard arts quick or buster quick arts sequence of cards to deal enough damage. Following this use case, Enkidu profits greatly from 3 quick cards even during the middle part of the boss battles, as this kind of deck is incredibly compatible with another gameplay perk of FGO, command codes. Enkidu's best card sequence during the middle phase of challenge quests is either Buster Quick Cards or MP Quick Cards. As his Buster card or MP is a solid starter for damage, his Quick card is great for generating stars, and the MP gain and additional effects from the command code and his arts card are already enough to sustain his MP gain. These Quick cards give Enkidu the choice to have 3 different effects that will be activated on each turn depending on what is needed. The advantage here is that the quick cards offer multiple effects at once and that they guarantee a certain degree of consistency. For example, if I have a star bomb on one quick card, but the enemy debuffed Enkidu, I can choose to use another quick card with the debuff cleanse command code, while not having to deprive myself of those crit stars and MP gain, both elements which are fundamental for Enkidu, as he needs the crit stars to make his chance of critting with the arts card as high as possible, and the additional MP gain from his quick cards to loop his MP more easily. An additional buster card in this case would not be ideal, as the damage would be higher but the stars and the MP meter will be missing. Similar story for an additional art card. The ideal card orders of Enkidu became even stronger after the latest updates in the JP version of FGO, as now the so-called rainbow chain boosts selected cards even if they aren't in a brave chain, further boosting Enkidu's damage for face cards, his star generation, and especially his MP gain. Soloers like Enkidu and Ku Alter got a huge buff through this new mechanic. If you've watched a couple of my solo videos, you might foresee what I'm about to say, but the advantages of Enkidu's triple quick deck greatly outweigh the potential and theoretical advantages of an extra buster or arts card, and I would be able, if I would be able to choose, I wouldn't change anything in Enkidu's deck. As for his arts and buster card, Enkidu isn't really too complex. On burst turns, Enkidu wants to use his MP in conjunction with his arts and buster card. Otherwise, buster quick arts, NP quick arts, and quick are the main face card orders for Enkidu's gameplay and flow. Art's Quick Quick and Buster Quick Quick are occasionally very good too though. That is what makes Enkidu in my opinion one of the more interesting servants to use on his own. The sheer amount of possibilities his gameplay offers are really fun, and his approach to a boss fight can vary drastically depending on what type of boss he's facing. Overall, I think that it's clear that Enkidu's deck is not a big problem, but rather a strength, as his consistency and value for longer and shorter fights is exponentially increased by the freedom of choice. Enkidu's third skill is now one of the more interesting aspects of his kit, and that's why I would like to talk about it first. As Enkidu is an overall pretty well-rounded solo servant who can solo most of FGO's content with relative ease, he is still not immune to the RPG elements of the game. Enkidu is a Lancer with an anti-berserk append skill and a threat to humanity power mod on his MP, has only true class advantages against 3 types of enemies, where in comparison, his main competitors can rely on either more universal damage or universal neutrality. Enkidu's third skill has always been very well known for being a 10k heal on a 10 turns cooldown at max level. And even though for many this is a one-of-a-time skill for boss battles, my content has proven many times that Enkidu can use this skill even thrice in very long boss battles, such as for example in my video where Enkidu tackles the 7.7 million HP Summer King Protea. I personally think that a shorter cooldown, even without the recent MP battery, would be plain set too strong for a servant who is already filled with gameplay features and utility skills that enable him to go on his own with not too much issues. What I've been saying for almost 5 years though, is that this skill should have had a 100% MP battery. I know that a 100% MP battery doesn't sound like the most fair thing to give to a servant like Enkidu, especially when I've already said that a shorter cooldown on the heal alone would already be too much in my personal opinion, but my reason for wanting such an upgrade was actually not that stretched, I think. First of all, I think that lore-wise a battery would be kind of fitting, since perfect form lets Enkidu restore his body as long as he can receive mana from the earth, and a reconstruction of Enkidu's body would also allow him to be ready for battle again, a lot like a command seal. The other reason why I wanted a 100% MP battery is because the 10 turn cooldown would actually prevent it from being overpowered nonetheless, at least in a solo boss battle. Except for those cases where the skill gets used multiple times, said skill can only really be seen as a battle reset through command spells. And a 100% MP battery at the end of the day would not be too shocking, and it would not reflect that much on Enkidu's performance, because Enkidu already loops his MP every 2 turns on his own. A battery would higher his momentum and give him 1 extra turn of damage, which isn't even worth considering when going against endurance battles. Admittedly, the higher momentum for boss battles such as Nobu Avenger and Archer from the Guda Guda events, and as well as like Odysseus from the White Day event, could be a bit more than very strong. So this point of mine is not really objective. However, I think that the developers of FGO introduced an even better solution with a 50% battery. A 50% battery is what enables Enkidu to be more compatible with team compositions, and in a solo scenario, he is now able to loop back to back without relying on the enemy's hit counts, as he normally already refills around 50% of his MP gauge. This is especially useful in the case that the boss has the divine trait, so Enkidu can still loop even though he can't get any refund from the enemy attacking him. Overall in Enkidu's kit, this battery has a great synergy with his MP gain numbers, his basic stats, and his need for more tools in order to function in team play. As far as skill buffs go, this is a very good one in my opinion, surely one of the high end of FGO's standards. Not that the 1 and 2 star servants would not be jealous of these attentions. Yeah, thank lasagna. Also, I would like to take the opportunity to say Sony Media Entertainment for copyright striking my channel for months now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sony. You're the best. Let's continue. Next, I would like to talk about Enkidu's second skill, as his first skill is both mechanically and practically very simple, and there's not a lot to say. I've said many times in the comment section of my and other creators' channels that Enkidu's second skill is one of the best skills in the game and by far the strongest defensive aspect of Enkidu's kit. I've also actually gone out of my way to explain it a couple of times, but the scope in my opinion was never sufficient enough to share my complete knowledge, so I'm happy that this video is my chance. Enkidu's second skill starts with a hefty 50% critical attack chance down. This is an incredible testament to Enkidu's capability of dealing with high damaging bosses, as the most common source of damage for them is critical attacks. There have been, and will be in the future, multiple instances where the bosses are not viable for most low-profile soloers because those are killed in 1 or 2 turns with very high critical damage. Enkidu can mitigate these high numbers by putting a debuff on them that lasts for 3 turns. I always appreciate critical rate down debuff on servants, because they're basically defending the whole team, but without really being defense oriented, as this effect is normally applied on a noble phantasms, which means your servant is also doing damage while applying the debuff, and skills with other effects stacked on top. In Co-Alter's case, the further effect is an attack down, which on top of his other defensive elements makes Co-Alter able to keep up with everything but foreigners. By the way, if you're curious to see more Co-Alter content, I will leave a link in the description for Leon Yuyen, an amazing FGO creator for high-end Co-Alter solos and also a bit of Kama. He's sadly not active anymore, but everything he and his favorite servant achieved until his last video is an archive of amazing solo videos. It's a legendary testament, and I miss you, Leon. Going back to the skill, Enkidu's other effects start with an evade removal. This can be an amazing tool for bosses who like to use defensive skills shortly before their MP break or death, as it guarantees Enkidu's flow without the waiting time that comes from not having an invulnerability pierce, like for example Super Orion does. I'm not trying to overhype Enkidu in this video, and objectively speaking, an invulnerability pierce is a better offensive tool in soloing, but only because a specific thing is very good, it doesn't automatically mean that the other isn't. Here, in my solo video Fuma's Summer's Quest, you can see how Enkidu's second skill is making full usage of its capability, as Enkidu is at the same time removing Fuma's evade, while also lowering his critical attack chance, which is Fuma's most dangerous quality in this boss fight. Overall, evade removal is a very good effect and enables Enkidu to not get stopped by the boss, even when the latter uses an evade to slow down the battle's momentum. The last effect of this skill is a 1-turn evade, which is very good to ensure Enkidu can survive an enemy noble phantasm without having to rely on survivability-oriented mystic codes. These effects, all in the same button press, would usually translate into a higher cooldown, but this skill has only 5 turns. This implies that Enkidu can actively have 2 turns of cooldown on a crit down, while only 4 on the evade removal and evade for himself. Combining that with the fact that Enkidu loves to use the Atlas Mystic Code, the downtimes and the amount of effects this skill has make it an incredible anti-boss tool, something that very few other servants in the game can rely on. While Shi1D, for example, has a spammable invincibility with other offensive buffs, his skills on their own are not groundbreaking. Instead, it's their combinations that enable him to never die to anything that isn't an inflated Avenger boss. Lastly, Enkidu's first skill is a 50% buster up with an additional 50% boost on either his quick or arts card. This skill is arguably, even before the latest buff to the third skill, Enkidu's weak point, as this one makes his MP stronger, but also has a 50% chance of not boosting anything. Let me explain. When I talked about Enkidu's deck, I said that personally I wouldn't change anything about it, as it seems to me like a balanced, interesting and non-aggravating element of Enkidu's colored kit. Enkidu's first skill, however, is where I would like to change something. Ignoring the fact that Lasagna must have forgotten its boundaries as servant skills started to become more and more filled with effects over time, Enkidu's first skill is from an era of FGO where they tried to have a balance, and in the context of FGO's first years, this skill was very good. A mana burst was considered a good offensive skill, and a cooldown of 5 on top of another 50% bonus was actually even better than the ordinary. Considering the facts of today though, this skill is the only thing in Enkidu's kit that actually shows its age. Modern servants have improved and saturated skills when compared to Enkidu's mana burst, like for example Muramasa. I also said that this skill has a 50% chance of boosting nothing outside of its Buster card and MP, and that's because Enkidu's effectiveness comes from the cohesion of all his kit's elements, including his MP. As Enkidu wants to repeat using his MP as much as possible during battles, when the additional 50% boost goes to his quick card, what is essentially happening is that Enkidu loses a chance to boost his art card. Enkidu's arts card with a guaranteed crit from his triple quick deck and the 50% boost from the mana burst ensures him to loop back to back, when all conditions are met of course. On the other hand, a 50% boost to his quick card has very little contribution for Enkidu's loop potential, and the extra stars and damage from the buff normally aren't really worth it. This isn't really a problem if the battle is almost over, as you can just go for Noble Phantasm and Quick Buster, but rather when Enkidu's momentum could really use some boost from the additional MP gain and damage. This skill is not bad, because as I've already mentioned, something being better doesn't make the other thing bad, but it is not a so amazing point of Enkidu as a top-notch soloist, and one which actually keeps him dependent from RNG, which is a defining characteristic of FGO's gameplay and can be the origin for many frustrating moments in the game. Overall, Enkidu's skills are very good. In 3 skills, Enkidu has enough offensive, defensive, and utility tools to fight against most of FGO's CQ bosses with no difficulty. Enoma Elish is a single target Noble Phantasm with multiple effects and amazing damage. As of the recording of this video, Enkidu's MP is on the very high end of the charts when it comes to damage, and that's what finalizes Enkidu's damage potential. Because Enkidu loops Enoma Elish with not too much difficulty in most of the battles, the NP doing so much damage is a very handy feature in Enkidu's kit. With the damage though, there are 3 additional effects which range from really good to really situational. The 30% damage down for 3 turns is the best effect of this Noble Phantasm, as this high looping potential creates a strong snowball effect where damage accumulates rapidly, and in some battles, Enkidu can have 50% buster up from his first skill, 80% NP up from Black Rail, and 90% defense down by looping his MP 3 times in a row. This is not an uncommon scenario with high hit counts bosses. The most common scenario for Enkidu is to use his Noble Phantasm every 2 turns, and so Enkidu can very frequently rely on a 60% extra damage from the debuff, which is very helpful when he tries to finish a battle rapidly. But with his brand new MP battery, Enkidu looping 3 times in a row will become way more common. The second effect is a 500% chance to stun divine enemies. This effect is very strong against story bosses, and the reason why every FGO account with Enkidu doesn't have to try a lot when it comes to story progression. Most of the story bosses in FGO have the divine trait, and when a servant with a loopable MP, very high damage, and the other side effects can stun the enemy, it's not impossible to understand why Enkidu is as popular as he is in Fate Grand Order. However, when talking about challenge quest bosses, my regular viewers will know for a fact that those bosses are almost never divine, quite the opposite. The divine trait in challenge quests is very rare, and Enkidu overall can't rely on this effect for most of the challenge quests, which makes this effect more situational than most people think, at least for that kind of quests. Also, some bosses that should be divine can't be stunned for no real reason. I am looking at you. It is sometimes funny to think about the possible timeline where Skaha Lancer got the stun for divine enemies, as she is the god killer and the killer of ghosts and the creatures from her land, and Enkidu was the one to have a universal stun debuff on MP for all enemies, as although his chain get more effective with the higher the divinity grade, he can also stun pretty minor foes. I must admit that the potential there for Enkidu would be pretty nice, but let's not dream too much, huh? As it is, Enkidu's stun makes him humiliate big godlike bosses in story, and that's everything you could wish for if you don't care about CQ shenanigans. And if you really don't want to hurt yourself, please don't care about them. Just do your thing. Use command seals and the rest, and you'll be fine. The last effect of this Noble Phantasm is a 200% power mod against enemies with the Threat to Humanity trait, which further emphasizes Enkidu's role as a god tier servant for story quests, where even the most experienced players of FGO will struggle without command seals at first. This effect is very handy for some specific lost belt boss battles, as shown here. In conclusion, Enoma Elish is one of the best noble phantasms in the game and culminates Enkidu's kit with further damage and utility. Truly a noble phantasm fitting of FGO's best clay. After I've talked extensively about Enkidu's kit, let's see what his competition has to offer in comparison. In FGO, the premise is that neutral classes are generally more universal at soloing. That's why servants like Tyra, Ganesha, Van Gogh receive a lot of love in the soloing community, and they can achieve great results without having to watch out for the enemy's servant class. This doesn't mean that they have an overall better kit, but simply that they can solo more, simply because of the fact that they circumvent some of the FGO's RPG elements like class affinity. On the other hand, Berserkers can be very odd, with Heracles being generally good enough with Sipansi for a set amount of turns, and Cool Alter being on the very high end of the soloing spectrum. They have the advantage of doing very high damage against everything, but also need to have an almost solely defensive kit to not die too fast. If you see Cool Alter's kit, you will notice that actually every single one of his skills is a defensive skill. That's what makes him also so special. Having the second highest attack rate in the game, and also the fact that he has so many defensive tools at his disposal, it's not hard to imagine why he is so strong. Rulers are the best soloing class in the game, with Shi1D being plain said unbalanced. I think that the gameplay designers of FGO didn't really understand what they were doing when they came up with the first Emperor. I mean, lore-wise, it's very fitting, as it is, for example, for God Juna to be so strong, but gameplay-wise, that makes Shi1D pretty much a unique case of power creep. As a ruler servant with a massive HP pool, spammable invincibility, very high steroids, and every skill with both a good offensive and defensive tool. As it stands, I can see anyone being as strong as him when not relying on niches. Another shout out. If you like Shi1D and solo content in general, of course my buddy Carrot Guy Achilles solos everything he can with Shi1D and his Super Orion. And even though he's a consolidated YouTube channel, if for whatever reason you happen to watch this video without being subscribed to him, do yourself a favor and go rectify that. So with this premise out of the way, let's talk about the less cool kids in the class, the non-neutral servants. There are only two servants that really stick out and can keep up with the neutral servants in my opinion, and these are Super Orion and Enkidu. Other noteworthy servants like Kama and Kukulane have big problems, with the first having to rely heavily on her charm effect on MP, and the latter having an amazing price to performance ratio but the low stats of a 3-star servant. My complete explanation of Enkidu's kit should suffice for understanding how strong he actually is. Without relying on his niches, Enkidu's kit can still solo the vast majority of FGO's content as of today, and when his niches apply, which is actually not super uncommon, however it's not as popular as some might think, Enkidu is plain said unstoppable. His kit can counter many gimmicks from FGO's hardest content. Even when the enemy has strong utility tools like buff removal and invincibility ignore, Enkidu still has the option to outburst them. Really fun servant to use and overall one of FGO's most efficient to use. Super Orion on the other hand is another crazy beast, able to keep up with the very harsh competition from the neutral class servants. Super Orion's kit is not exactly designed for defense, instead where Super Orion really shines is in his utility and offensive tools, which outclass Enkidu in some very wonky scenarios. Super Orion can rely on an infinite debuff immunity buff because of his spammable MP, alongside an invincibility ignore which keeps his momentum very high, regular and constant flow of critical stars, and sky-high damage potential with his crazy buffs. These tools aren't exactly as useful as Enkidu's universal heal, battery, or invuln, but they're very good at countering bosses, which no other servant in the game could defeat as easily. That's how, for example, Super Orion is able to solo bosses, which heavily rely on debuffs like Kama and Cernunnos. Also, his burst potential is the highest in the game when on his own and no niches apply, making him able to outdamage some bosses who could otherwise take advantage of his weak defenses. It's difficult to stack the soloers of FGO against each other, as the strong RPG nature of the game makes some servants better than others in some contexts, but worse in others, with only Shin in my opinion being a really superior servant when in competition with others. As it stands though, in my opinion Enkidu and Super Ryan are even more difficult to compare because both are very strong against specific and different groups of enemies. If your account happens to have both, you can basically play the entire game without ever having to think about team compositions. So why just choose a side when you can have both? Understand at the end that this is my opinion. You are free to disagree and are invited to if you feel strongly about it. Remember that these are different opinions, and it's fine, because it's about a game with glorified feat events and goofy outer space characters. I hope you enjoyed this very extensive review and in-depth analysis of Enkidu Lancer. The script was in the works for almost 2 years, with many modifications and 2 major updates from Lasagna. I am not a professional content creator and probably barely qualify as an amateur. I have some other videos in mind where I would do another voiceover, but those are not really FGO related. I want to wrap up this video by repeating myself and making clear that FGO is not a difficult game, and you should rather enjoy it by playing with the servants you like the most, and chatting with the people you can bond the most. I personally love Enkidu, and it's because of him that I keep playing FGO, a game I would have otherwise abandoned a long time ago. Thank you very much for your attention and watching.